Thank you, Rob. Thank you, the brave souls who drove down here, or were able to drive down here, and everyone who has electricity and is joining us tonight. I know that I'm missing a lot of my personal circle who weren't able to get here virtually or in person. And my thanks to Work San Jose, Joe. This is a beautiful space, and to Poetry Center San Jose. I'm going to try to divide my visual attention between people seated in front of me and the screen, but I know I'm going to probably lean toward these three-dimensional people right in front of me. And I also want to add to the land acknowledgement, the Ramaytush Ohlone, the people whose land my home and Facebook Meta and all kinds of other entities now occupy. So being that it is not only Pi Day, but Women's History Month, I built this reading around that and would like to share why I've chosen these poems, these poets. These are women poets in particular who have really influenced me from, my teenage years through today. Certainly not all of them, because we only have so much time for reading now, and I am going to read some of my own work. So without further ado, I'm going to start with really early influence, although not the first, and with words, language. So this is Words by Sylvia Plath. Axes, after whose stroke the wood rings, and the echoes traveling off from the center like horses. The sap wells like tears, like the water striving to reestablish its mirror over the rock that drops and turns. A white skull eaten by weedy greens. Years later, I encounter them on the road. Words dry and riderless, the indefatigable hoof taps, while from the bottom of a pool, fixed stars govern a life. I think my attraction to Plath, especially as a teenager, was both the this really compelling, engaging rhythm that was not just about stress patterns, but about vowel sounds especially. And this way that a voice could bring in authority, even a voice that didn't feel that it had any authority, could bring it in by using these very physical aspects of language. So the first poem in A Different Physics, not the proem, so to speak, but the first poem of the first section, is an ekphrastic. It was written in response to a piece of artwork, but then it took on a voice that was part mine and an authority of its own. And I think it definitely speaks to not just this moment, but to our work as writers or as co-makers, listeners of art. Perseverance. Take back those keepers of wonder. The swan's back, brown creeper, and golden grouse. The flirty tails, the talons arched like a map's edge. I'm finished with plumage. Etch me a classic, a girl like Sisyphus in pewter hues, pushing a corner of sky. That girl was the tiniest part of a collage, fragment in the corner, and all of its possibilities opened up there for me, in addition to the parts of birds. So these new kind of handles on ways to experience power or be in a mode of power, they're a lot of fun to play with and play in. And then over decades, I can't even say years, over decades, they can also be softened in form and by kind of taking on the guardrails and the guides and scaffolding that form gives us. So this piece is called Equinox and All, and it alludes to William Carlos Williams's poem Spring and All, which is a pandemic poem. And it was written pretty much almost exactly 3 years ago at the beginning of quarantine. And I put it here because I feel that same, that impulse, certainly not the only one acting on me now, that Plathian impulse, but it's one of the foundational and core threads. Equinox and All. It was Thursday. It was warm. Equal hours of rain and sun to match the parity of night and day. To catch me, half wonder, half anxiety, taking solace in names as crows gathered in the neighbor's cedar. And juncos filled a canopy of oak here. A small backyard in the suburbs. A small parcel, equal to any before the stars. A season arrives, defies confinement. We dress for contagion, we quantify calm, we dance in separate rooms. We might rechart the stars, scour the old maps as if their errors were not ours, and writing them could write the world. Such vacant streets. Only birdsong and cautious distances and faces of oxalis rooted beside the fence. I'm going to jump forward now to a much later influence who I had the great blessing of studying with. And here is someone who was also influenced by Sylvia Plath, although from a different country, from the same, writing in the same tradition, somewhat an overlapping tradition. But you can hear that, that influence of Plath in rhythm and in vowel sounds, and in the questioning, which is another means of power. This is by Ivan Boland. That the science of cartography is limited, and not simply by the fact that this shading of forest cannot show the fragrance of balsam, the gloom of cypresses, is what I wish to prove. When you and I were first in love, we drove to the borders of Connaught and entered a wood there. Look down, you said. This was once a famine road. I looked down at ivy and the scotch grass rough cast stone had disappeared into, as you told me, in the second winter of their ordeal, in 1847, when the crop had failed twice. Relief committees gave the starving Irish such roads to build. Where they died, there the road ended, and ends still. And when I take down the map of the island, of this island, it is never so I can say, here is the masterful, the apt rendering of the spherical as flat, nor an ingenious design which persuades a curve into a plane, but to tell myself again that the line which says woodland and cries hunger and gives out among sweet pine and cypress, finds no horizon, will not be there. Some of these are hard poems to follow. It's impossible to encapsulate the influence that our makers and teachers, even the teachers we never worked with in person, but that we apprenticed ourselves to, just, exactly where does that influence begin, and which part of it is gratitude, which part of it is imitative, when do we grow out of that into our own. So here's a poem called Globe. The earth on an axis of brass, tilted back, spun for the fun of it, for the contrast of mountains and seas under our fingertips, for the pastel blur of states whose names will slip out of usage, as if a typeface could fix them, or their old grievances find peace in polygons. We know the globe will yield someday to the next great framing of space. We'll rest in its mesh of meridians beside the hardbound lexicon, laid open, inviting us to navigate between a grace shared with the crudest of stone tools and the gravity of models and names we hold above revision and fear to lose. There are a lot of poems about tools of many kinds in this collection. I was born, I grew up with a shop, and I guess I'm a hardware person at heart, and hardware and language. So here are a couple of more poems that I think come out of that same kind of rhythmic sensibility, influence, and the questioning drive. And this one is also ekphrastic, and the occasion was a photograph that a friend of mine took, and it was such a bizarre juxtaposition of nature and artifice, of mathematical structure in this case, which is not to say that math is not natural, but just this was a graph on an iPad. So there you go. And it's also a piece where following my wonder and staying in the curiosity took me to a really unexpected place. I thought this poem was going to be about bridging gaps between cultures that have often been at war with each other, and it managed to do that, but it went in an entirely different direction. Golden ratio. The graph and its axes. The frog on the graph. Just landed on the soft pads of its golden toes. Its golden back a mottled diagonal. Far less than the gap from terrarium to table, smooth as the boxed blue legend and the swell of red beneath the graph-flown curve. An area left for you to compute. It's all stitched up, thread thin and notched along X, along Y, those scars of truth, those vines toward a first hard fruit, toward spirals and scrolls and ageless ratio, indifferent to acts of measurement, to arts of definition, and the gifts of statistics, my friend, those infinite distances of our making. We okay on time? Yeah, we're fine. Okay. I think I'll read one other very short piece, leaping off of Ivan's piece, partly about memory and partly about plants. Bougainvillea. 3 true flowers and 3 bright bracts. Gaiety itself, the scrubby vine soaring past its lattice over concrete and rough stone, dirt and here, an untended flourishing, astounds the casual passerby who passes swallows and cypresses and shadows bent with ease, up and over the curve of unremembered things. Lucille Clifton is a writer who I encountered much later, because of course, I don't know that she was taught that much in the 70s or even the early 80s. And this is one of my very favorite pieces, not just of hers, but of, if I had my, group of favorite poems of all time. And this is Cutting Greens. And I would encourage you to go to the Poetry Foundation's website, where they have a recording of Clifton reading this piece. Cutting greens. Curling them around, I hold their bodies in obscene embrace, thinking of everything but kinship. Collards and kale strain against each other, away from my kiss-making hand and the iron bed pot. The pot is black, the cutting board is black, my hand, and just for a minute, the greens roll black under the knife, and the kitchen twists dark on its spine, and I taste in my natural appetite the bond of live things everywhere. The movement in this poem, where the kitchen spirals open into the cosmos, astounds me every time. It's impossible to hear without seeing that. I love a well-rendered spiral in general, but this one also kind of brings the entire cosmos with it. So I think also Clifton helps me see ways to be a little more restrained with some of the heavier hitting rhythmic styles and find power in different modes. So now that we were on to the cosmos and it is Pi Day, I'm going to read a poem called Praise on Pi Day. One of the most probably, or I should say least enjoyable suggestions poets often receive is, you should write a poem about that. And a friend of mine did say, hey, you should write a poem about Pi or Pi Day. And I was like, And, but then a phrase came into my head and a subversive thought, which is like, why not use poetry's most repetitive form, or one of poetry's most repetitive forms, for a non-repeating number? Okay. This is a pantoum for Pi Day. Praise on Pi Day. To praise the non-repeating, I will praise the universe. Each smooth circumference, each jagged fit and fractal sculpted face of life and not life. They're everywhere you look. The universe, each smooth circumference of our daily mess, won't fit in simple bins of life and not life. They're everywhere you look, and elsewhere too. What surprises us is not our daily mess, unfit for simple bins, but each repeated lesson learned anew, and elsewhere too. What surprises us is not that we forget, but that our learning shifts with each repeated lesson learned anew. The aster blooms, the supernova cools. We might forget that all our learning shifts into the pupil of a coming day. The aster blooms, the supernova cools its jagged fit and fractal sculpted face into the pupil of a coming day, where praise is non-repeating and we praise. That's also one piece I find hard to recite strictly from memory because of the repetition. So that opening, that enjoyment of astronomical imagery for sure, comes up in a prose poem, which is a fairly new piece, but more importantly, a completely new territory for me, or at least it seemed like it. Prose poetry felt like this place I didn't know how to get into. Couldn't get my head around. I mean, I knew what it was, I've enjoyed it, but I couldn't find my way in. And I agreed to do an ekphrastic project that a friend, a fellow laureate, was running. And here was this picture. And I was a little behind on the deadline. And during a moment of insomnia, the first phrase came and opened up, and it was really built on my mind kind of gathering all these different structures that were similar in some ways, and that this painting, photograph actually triggered. And it felt like it did not need line breaks. It did not need to be in that mode of verse. Yet it was still, it felt like the impulse was poetry and lines of poetry. There's a comma in the title. Sun, flower. The center of anything has work to do. Bearing, spinning, taking things in, sending them out again. Pupil and iris. Axle and hub, the dense, dark center of our gathered stars, swathed in what light it hasn't swallowed, dragging bright dust in arced scarves, aster to aster, disc to disc, the way a word begets a world. Say inflorescence. Say one bent petal rests on the rim. A tear, an inflection. Say the mind travels there. A foot explores the unexpected curve. Can we go from the sublime to the ridiculous? I think you're supposed to go the other way around, but you probably know the poem, Browning poem, the female Browning. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach. When feeling out of sight, were the ends of being and eternal grace. As a poet, poets play in juxtapositions, and they're not all of our choosing, they just kind of arrive. And for me, it was navigating this new world of remote communication and condensed communication, which is kind of a poet's stock and trade anyway, and wryness and humor, which is kind of the only thing that has kept me sane since 2016. And so, how do I heart thee came to mind. And so since we're now on to prose, I'm just going to read this very short piece of satire. How do I heart thee? I heart your new haircut. I heart your photogenic coffee, footwear, offspring. With fleeting hesitation, I heart the allegedly unfiltered pic of a rotting rowboat on a mossy bank and the brisk political rant in 20 blurry screenshots. Heart, heart, heart that puppy. And the tattoo, as in heart reaction, then the actual word love in all caps with interstitial periods, then a heart-shaped exclamation point. That's high density heart, a little neutron star of non-committal affection. I will heart your message. I will heart your comment. I will heart your text. I will heart it when you heart my message, comment, or text. But I cannot heart the semiotic minefield that follows. If or when we land on a perfectly acceptable thanks, it seems hyperbolic to react with heart, but churlish to react with like, which breaks the heart momentum and could be seen as a gesture toward ending an exchange grown tedious, as it most likely has. I've considered eschewing heart entirely, or in all but the most obligatory circumstances, because once you start hearting some things, you feel Scrooge-assed, dispensing a mere like for others. This worry is compounded by knowledge that your heart reaction life can be easily monitored, fanning latent resentment. I admire those with the discipline to use heart sparingly and trust that they do so from equanimity rather than smug aplomb. If ever a void cried out for fulfillment, it would be the callously underserved niche between heart and life. Distress over the heart-light dialectic has led me to react with surprise more often than authenticity would permit. I use surprise for things that surprise me, but I also claim surprise when confronted with ethical quandaries, conflicting emotions, or sheer pictographic ennui. Light is easy. As easy as neutral to good news, birthday greetings, sunsets, and light traffic, but not as easy as when there were no other options. When there were no other options, everyone felt the same awkward limitations. When liking something insightful about something abhorrent, or like as acknowledging news of an illness, stalker, climate disaster, perhaps best of all, there was no expectation of love. In fact, every time a new reaction is released into the social verse, users are confronted with an almost paralyzing web of strategic decisions fueled by our mammalian instinct for survival, via group acceptance. It seems reactions, emojis, and emoticons, a dying underserved art, if ever there was, emoticon, are not immune to subversion or complaint. I have no desire for subcategories of heart or the additional decision-making stress they would swiftly usher. Yet I can't help but entertain candidates such as tough love, unrequited idolatry, hugely intrusive infatuation, stealth pheromonal waft, friend zone for zone, classical agape, Disney-sanctioned lust, revenge commitment, universal bliss, and hyper-regrettable hookup. I heart what I heart, but I fear not to heart. I heart to varying unspecified depths. I like more things than I honestly like. I am disproportionately surprised. I weep at times I scowl, but am slow to anger unless heart-starved. And I take heart, for I have witnessed moments of reactional maturity rooted in reflective grace. How could you not heart that? Let me count the ways. I'm going to close with Emily Dickinson. And I don't know why I picked this piece. It seems odd for like a nice Jewish girl to have a piece about church and the resurrection and all that. But these were really the sound patterns that even preceded Plath. And they're just magical, safe in their alabaster chambers. Safe in their alabaster chambers, untouched by morning and untouched by noon, lie the meek members of the resurrection, rafter of satin and roof of stone. Grand grow the years in the crescent above them. Worlds scoop their arcs, and firmaments row, diadems drop, and doges surrender, soundless as dots on a disk of snow. How could you not want to write or make poems after reading that? So with snow, I'm going to read a very recent poem, another ekphrastic. Many of you may have seen this photograph that was circulating on the internet a lot last year. It was of the Orion Nebula over a snowy vineyard. Just an astounding photograph by Brennan Gilmore, is the photographer's name. Orion over Winter Vineyard. Orion is there, but so is Chagall, and a long, lithe sky merwoman whose navel emanates light. How light finds the wooden horizon behind the snowy rows of posts. Vines strung between them, skeletal, bearing the patient, unseen work toward bearing fruit. A farmhouse sleeps in the distance. The nebula, stars blossoming, transfixes us. We'll call it a wrap. Thank you, Rob. I don't know if questions came in over chat or not.
Oh, let me see.
We've got the chat up here.
You got any? Sure.
No, not just.
I can't see anyone on my Zoom screen. I can only see myself.
There's this screen right here, the giant screen has the chat up. So not a question.
Not a question.
Just lots and lots of love. many hearts. Many hearts. Here's one. So what are you reading currently?
Ooh, okay. You know, when Rob said you can read for 30 to 40 minutes, like, wow, that is such an incredible, generous slot. And then I started to gather all these poems by women poets. Like, I have not enough time. Right now, I'm reading work by local poets, and I'm reading work by essayists. I'm completely enamored of Mary Ruefle's work, both the essays and the prose poems. I've just picked up some brand new Rilke translations that I'm excited about. I'm reading a lot of Carlo Rovelli, the Italian physicist who talks about poetry on occasion. So how could I not love that?
All right, so ask Susan to unmute and ask you the question there.
Susan, unmute.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Lisa. First of all, I loved that you put together such a thoughtful presentation as well as the individual poems. And I also love, or is that like a lot, that you don't feel the need to abandon sound for ideas or to abandon ideas for sound. And I wonder whether, and this is the kind of question I hate to be asked, but do you start more often with one or the other?
And of course, you know, the answer is yes. But I mean, they're wed. Even if I'm not aware of it, you know, forms carry meaning. They carry wisdom. Mm-hmm. They carry somatic wisdom, and they carry ancient, you know, like species wisdom. Sometimes the sound is driving what I hear and then what I build on, and I'm not fully aware of the meaning. I'm looking up at Susan on the screen here. I know I'm not looking into the camera. So, and I lean a lot toward assonance, you know, these light vowel sounds. And you know, the meaning will sometimes leap out at me immediately, sometimes later, and usually it's what I follow. But like with the poem Sunflower, I heard that line, you know, a sunflower really looks, you know, it has this circular symmetry. It looks really central. Mm-hmm. With that big bun in the middle. And the line, the center of anything has work to do, just kind of popped into my head. And then I went with the images. The poem about the frog on the graph, again, just kind of leapt. And I followed the stress pattern.
Oh, interesting.
if all the stress pattern, because I can sometimes really hear that before I know what words are going to be there. And that will take me to, as I'm listening to that, the visual images or analogies come in, and they kind of come together. And sometimes that happens in an hour or a day, and sometimes it happens in like 8 years, like I get really stuck. But my primary tool is listening for musicality of the sounds, and for stress patterns, like, I'll hear rhythm.
Yeah, I don't remember which poem it was, but there was one poem that seemed to have almost a sprung rhythm. And that really struck me. Yeah.
But working in like a fixed line with a fixed meter was a huge challenge for me. And then till I started doing it while walking, of course, and that helped a lot. But it took many years till it started to feel like I could bring my rhythms into it.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So another little question in, what encouragement would you give to youth writers in high school who want to write but are feeling inhibited, which, wow, I can really relate to that. We were assigned to write poems in high school, and it was very intimidating, like not thinking we were like, artists in any sense.
Get curious and make it not about you. Those are my two kind of biggest. You can get curious, make it not about you. Try on someone else's work. You can imitate someone else's work, and when you do, you'll learn a lot. And it kind of frees you up from saying, this is my thing. And then, disengage that. You'll discover what you like, what you don't like, and start to build your own pattern. Getting curious, just experiment. Give yourself a prompt, a poem that does such and such. And then, can I make it longer, shorter, faster, slower, crazier, quieter? And in doing that, kind of a big stylistic experiment. Again, you learn about the tools and processes of poetry. Another one is to write persona poems. Take on someone else's voice. It could be someone really different from yourself. That's also very freeing. And when I say freeing, I don't mean that you don't think about the art of what you're doing, but you can kind of say, okay, this is so-and-so talking. It's not me. And that can make it. And then, try for some superlatives, like who can write the whateverist poem. So taking away the it has to be great, that'll inhibit the exploration that you need to work toward really, building things. Yeah, and make it as sensory as you can.
Well, super quick, harder follow-up to that, but what about youth being made fun of for writing poetry? Wow.
That's a hard one.
Write funny poems.
I didn't think about, I guess, is it like still like you would get fun of for taking ballet?
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
I was made
Regardless
fun of for
of-
being an artist, like, called a faggot and whatever, yeah.
I would
So,
think in
yeah.
the age of where, like spoken word, hip hop, all of that, those are seen as, powerful, popular. Look at Hamilton. Maybe it's, if the quality thing, like my work's not good enough, so therefore I'll be made fun of, is it? And, you could not tell people for a long time. Use it to build your, your secret superpower.
There's a question in the room, and maybe repeat it if it
But
comes in.
who was asking, by the way? Is it?
That was Rob, actually. I think he's asking for one of his sons.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
my own child is not
Right.
free to like poetry because I do, right?
Maybe people still make fun of Rob.
I think I asked
I
for
do.
the interest of all of us.
It's a hard thing, and maybe it used to fall along gender lines. I don't know that it does anymore. It was never really like saying, you play hockey or you're a rock climber. But it's not an easy venture. So I bet you're clever enough, Rob, to come up with some good comebacks.
Well, now because it's changed since the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
You have Patricia Smith, you've got the you've got all kinds of folks now.
Yeah, you know,
In space. that are-
just put on a video of Patricia Smith and drop it. Like, that's all you need to do.
Yeah, and it's like, imagine guessing.
I think, I suspect it's a really different landscape now, especially because there are so many young kids, teens in spoken word. Yeah.
It's just maybe for some, they haven't been exposed. They just need the door to be opened a little bit. So, have you heard this person? Have you heard this group? Check out The Last Poets in 1972. And then, go from
Remember, you guys shout out here, they're not hearing you out here.
Oh, yeah, people couldn't hear. People could not hear. I'll just say that Rob gave a brilliant, eloquent answer
It was on question.
to his own question.
Right.
Sorry, only microphone is at the podium.
Any other questions? Let's see.
There's a thought?
Oh, I just wanted to comment when we were talking to Susan and we talked about the poem about the frog and the graph, which really struck me. I know Peggy said, and then the frog just did that. And you were describing that. Oh, that was great.
You know, you want to capture that kind of immediacy when you're writing, and it's hard if you're writing something that takes time, right? But if you can really stay with that moment and all the embodied, you know, the sensations, that helps it stay immediate for the reader too.
I have a
Thank you.
question.
Yeah.
And ironically, I'm in education, so I definitely get his question about some students who feel inhibited, even in this day of social media where you can find your community of artists. But especially when it comes to writing and being creative, I had a fourth grader ask me, I need help with my imagination because he finds it difficult to get started. And he was just talking aloud and didn't know that I was a writer. And I said, he's like, oh, well, you can help me. I said, no, I hate writing. And he went, what? And I went to explain to him the love-hate relationship I have for it, kind of like golf. When you love to hate it, right? Right, much cheaper, right? But just as strenuous is the getting started, the getting out of your own way. I think you alluded to it about maybe certain tips or whatever to, you know, it's the sound, it's the rhythmic, it's the pace, it's prose, like all of that. And do you ever find that you, unlike writer's block, do you ever find yourself hating to get out of the gate, or maybe not hate, but just what it is, it means to have your mind think about the middle of what you're writing, knowing that beginning part is just, it's painstaking. It's like, what do I start with? No, that's not what I want to start with. Like, do you ever struggle with that?
Well, it depends what you mean by middle. Do you mean chronologically the middle, or do you mean physically the middle of the poem? Because you don't know when the poem is finished, where that middle is going to be.
You have to come back to, like, oh, right, exactly. So that's what I mean. Like, I defer to you. What is that struggle like for you? If it is a struggle.
It depends on how I start. If I happen to have this burning desire to write some specific thing, but nothing else is there except that I want to write it, that's kind of a, you know, it's a hard place to move out from. If on the other hand, I'm kind of just receptive to things that strike me, especially things that I hear for me, or see, and hopefully hear and see at the same time, then I listen to it. I really listen for what's coming in. And the other is to write things, to capture things as they occur to me, even if I don't know where they're going to go. And so it used to be all the random scraps of paper that I would try to put in the same envelope or flyer. Now it's on a really long note on my phone, right?
Yeah,
Or both, depending on what I have in hand, or a voice note.
yeah.
But to capture that thing, and it might be as short as, here, I'll tell you when. It might be as short as, hear the prickly pears grab the hillside. Scrubby shrubs escaped from gardens. When the Teslas come home. An eroding chain is a lovely shade of decay. Another, and these are all from walks, just going out
Yeah.
for short walks.
Yeah.
And it depends on how I'm doing that day and what's happening, but sometimes that's a really fertile time. But listening, so I'll just tell you the advice that August Wilson, the playwright, gave our class. He visited my class at BU like eons ago. And he said, you'll hear this like line, like there are always and only two trains running. He'll hear a line and then he'll ask, who said that? Who said that? And then who said what back? And then what do you say next? He'll just listen for it to come in and then start to build the dynamics in the drama and the scene around that. So not to compare myself to August Wilson, but no, I listen for what arrives. And sometimes it all comes at once, the visual and the auditory. But the stuckness, that's where you go to your tools, right? And maybe I give myself an exercise. Like I'm gonna write, so many lines or stanzas in such format. It's like being a dancer. Maybe all you do is go in and you do your stretch and you do your this and you do your that, these different movement sequences that you're used to doing. And then you might notice how things come together in a way you hadn't thought of before, and you start to build phrases.
And that's a lot of trust
Yeah.
that you have to build and faith that it'll that process or that warm up will reap those benefits.
Yeah.
And I think that getting there, going back to that question about young people either having to do it or wish they could do it as well as one of their peers or want to be good right away.
So borrow good, feel it, take someone else's poem and memorize it and recite it, or type it out. Nothing like typing out someone else's piece and going, oh my gosh, that's where the line ends. Oh, really? Wait, I would have put this. Or how in the world did they ever come? That's a great way to start learning. Reciting, memorizing teaches you what's memorable, right? And what's not memorable. And reading a lot. But, and studying the tools, just like if you were taking painting, you would study pigments and brushes and, how to combine them and all of that. So really, studying the tools of the craft. Whether or not you intend to use them all the time, I hope that helps. I mean, you're out there on the front, or in the playful space.
Right.
And I'm sure you're a good mentor. Yeah. They're lucky to have you. Thank you all. Thank all of you.